I was going to say happy Labor Day weekend, but I guess that's already happened. Happy post-Labor Day. It's time for the Striker Texas MLS podcast. John Arnold here in lovely Dallas, Texas, joined by Chris Bills and Austin Victor Riza in Houston. You know the drill. You know what we do here. And if you don't, I'll explain it to you rather briefly. We talk about the three Texas MLS teams and how they're doing. One of them is doing really well. One of them is doing pretty well. One of them is doing really poorly. So poorly, in fact, that they've decided, we got to fire the coach. Let's start there, Victor, in Houston, where we got the news yesterday that Paulo Nagamura is coach no more. You did a big, long space yesterday that I think was sort of setting the tone for the discussion in the Houston media market. I saw some big names jump on your space. Not that you're not enough to carry, Victor. You know, you're a headliner. Don't get me wrong, man. But, you know, it seemed like everyone was using that space to sound off. What was your instant reaction when you heard this news? Just as recently as last week, you were telling us that it seemed like the team was committed to this project through 2023, giving the new coach another season. That is no longer the case. He's out. His assistants are gone. It's interim at the helm. What are the instant reactions in Houston?
Yeah, the funny thing is, you know, right after, a couple of days after Ted Siegel was in town with the commissioner, Don Garber, we put those quotes up on the striker.com. And when asked about, you know, the current state of the club, the owner, Ted Siegel, said he was obviously disappointed, not happy with being last in the Western Conference, but full confidence behind the general manager, Pat Onstad, and the coaching staff, or the technical staff, as he put it. Maybe we misunderstood, but it seemed like everything was going, you know, in better terms. Obviously, the big win over LAFC midweek was a big moment, you know, best moment for the club. Tough to follow it up. I think it was predictable that they were going to lose in Seattle, but I think maybe the way these results have gone is a big reason why Nagamura has been fired. You know, past 3 road games have been in the same fashion. Second half collapse, you know, 3 points in hand and then just kind of given away. And the biggest thing, I think, the biggest question mark is the big signing of the offseason. Sebastian Ferreira has proven to be a talented goal scorer. They just can't connect with him up top. The attack has been futile.
I mean, I think the big signing as well is Hector Herrera, right? And I wonder, I don't think that Siegel's necessarily calling up Herrera and saying, hey, man, what do you think about the coach? But, you know, when you're an owner, and especially when you're an owner who clearly wants to be somewhat involved, right? He's taking more of a stake in the team financially. He's in Houston doing a press conference with the commissioner. Honestly, sort of like, I'm not sure what that was about. Maybe you can sort of give us some insight because you were there. I really thought that there was going to be something that was going to come out of it. And then it just kind of seemed to be an update. But if you're that kind of owner, I can see you wanting to get, quote unquote, your guy in there and getting input from a guy like Hector Herrera, whose last coach was Diego Simeone, who works with Tata Martino and worked with Osorio on the national team, who was coached, if I'm not mistaken, you know, when he was at Porto by like Lopetegui. Like, this is a guy who's worked with some of the top managers in the world. No fault of Paulo Nagamura is that he doesn't have that resume yet. No fault that he wasn't able to have success in his first job as a first division head coach necessarily. But I can see why they'd say, hey, maybe it's time to go in a different direction. What's the vibe you got of why this decision happened?
Yeah, that's what, you know, kind of going back to beginning, that's what's shocking in all of this, because it seemed like Paulo Nagamura was their guy, right? I mean, this is the first full year under the owner. This is Pat Onstad's first year as a general manager. You know, they chose to not go with Tab Ramos, right? I mean, if this was kind of going to be the way of the roster, you know, maybe there was a thought to having kept them on and seeing how the season goes and then making a different decision. But no, they said, we're going to go clean slate. We're going to start with somebody, you know, fresh, you know, 100 applicants, over 100 applicants that was mentioned in the press conference just 8 months ago. And where Onstad said it was a very easy decision, where Paulo Nagamura stood out for his qualities, right? And this was going to be a long-term process, or at least, you know, it seemed like Nagamura had to support. So from that end, yeah, it did seem a little weird. The press conference this last week, I mean, it seemed like it was just an excuse to have a press conference. Maybe, like you said, just to give an update. There wasn't any real announcement. I mean, there was the inclination that, you know, with the announcement of the World Cup coming to Houston, there's going to be renovations to Houston Sports Park, more fields, but nothing that really, I think, warranted having a press conference other than just getting getting the opportunity to speak. But I mean, for us, I mean, it was obviously a good opportunity to speak with the owner, try to get his comments, seeing what the commissioner had to say about the market. Obviously, this is a big market for soccer in the United States. The
Yeah,
MLS
and I think
product just hasn't found a way to work here.
I think that's the thing, right? Is like when commissioner is in town, you better hope that it's either an expansion announcement or, you know, you've got a big piece of news, because if he's just making visits like this is something that came up a lot in my research of the Columbus Crew situation over the years. Is, you know, Don Garber would make these periodic visits to town, he'd have these press conferences, and nothing would really happen. And I think in that case, it was that the Hunts were trying to sell the club, right? And they were trying to continue to keep the Columbus Crew kind of in the news cycle. And I'm not saying that, you know, Ted Siegel's looking to sell or that Don Garber's looking to move the Houston Dynamo, but it does feel to me like this was a visit that wasn't necessarily a comfortable one for everybody in the Houston organization. And for Ted Siegel to come away from that and to, you know, seemingly, I think this is, you know, like you're saying, everything points to it being sort of an ownership decision. It does kind of make me wonder, you know, what kind of pressure is being put on, you know, whether it's from Siegel or from even higher than that, of, you know, the commissioner saying, like, I want the Houston market to matter. And I think that that's like a fair assessment from an MLS standpoint.
I mean, if that's the case, good for them, right? Because Garber is supposed to be essentially, you know, league commissioners in our weird American sports leagues are the mouthpiece for ownership, right? They're the ones who are keeping all these different partners in line, kind of pushing things in the same direction, trying to make sure that the league makes money, that these owners get more money in their pocket. It sounds kind of crass, but like, as much as we all want to talk about titles, on-field success, and we'll get to the games here in a second, you know, sports is a business, and it is about making money. When you look at Houston, and Victor, you know, I know you've been banging this drum for a long time. Like, it's the fourth largest city in the U.S. When Tab Ramos came in, I talk about this a lot. Like, when Tab Ramos came in, he said, hey, like, the Houston Metro has a population of Uruguay. Uruguay produces World Cup quality talent. They produce great players. And Houston's produced basically no one. And then you look at the fans. The fan base that is there, great fans, good fans. But is it big enough for a city as big as it is, with a downtown stadium located off public transit? With, you know, is the team doing enough? It just doesn't seem like it has been. And look, like, if this was a visit, Victor, for Garber to say, listen, Mr. Siegel, like, welcome in. You know, we've worked together. Now it seems like it's you and I. Like, we're going to be doing this together because this is your team almost fully now. Let's get serious. And then that leads to them saying, all right, let's get a more tenured coach in here. Ultimately, I think this is good long-term for the Dynamo. What was your read, Victor? What do you think was behind Garber coming in? And what do you think about Chris's note that maybe, hey, this is Garber saying, like, let's get Houston as an MLS market where it should be, where we already know it is as a soccer city?
I think it was a routine visit. You know, it might just be Garber following, you know, LAFC on tour, because I think his next stop was Salt Lake. So I mean, that could be part of it as well. You know, I think obviously Siegel has taken a bigger stake in recent weeks by buying out former minority owners in Gabriel Brenner. Oscar Loya made it more of his team. I don't think it's any coincidence that he's been involved more and more, right, with the investment on and off the field. I think they still, you know, everybody knows this roster still needs bettering, but I think there are things, you know, going a little bit back to the Nagamura situation, where, you know, I think there was the belief that there was pieces on this roster that could have had this team be more successful this year, right? You know, again, getting more out of Sebastian Ferreira, who arguably should be in the Golden Boot race, even with Houston, you know, the way it is. He has 10 goals. He should have 15. That would probably put him, you know, at least in the conversation for the last 5 games, right? Hector Herrera has not been a slam dunk here in Houston. I mean, they've only won 1 game with him. Seems to be injured, hasn't played the last 3 games. You know, we'll see what comes about. But obviously, you know, and locally, it is a bit of, you know, kind of the way Beckham arrived in Los Angeles, right? Fans are now kind of, you know, looking at him, you know, going to the Bad Bunny concert this week, going to Grupo Firme, and sort of while his team is, you know, sort of teetering on the brink of the playoff race, of how tough this injury can be, right? I mean, there's very different ways to take this. And obviously the head coach isn't the only concern here in Houston. I think you mentioned something. they brought in 3 coaches now, and obviously this is going before Siegel. 3 coaches with the background of youth development, and all 3 of them have essentially shied away from using the players in the academy. Why is that the case? And if we look at, even the current roster, the most promising prospect is Brooklyn Reigns, which, yes, Pat Onstad acquired in a trade for his rights with Real Salt Lake. He came out of the Barcelona Academy in Arizona. It's not even a local product. I mean,
Right.
Sure, a homegrown tag, and it's somebody for the future, and it's a very promising player, with the U.S. Youth National Team. But you're right, there isn't products being produced here. There's a larger problem here in Houston, but it does start with the first team. I do think there is the argument that a coach with more experience would have gotten more out of this roster, but we said that months ago, John. We said it here on these shows. We've said it.
I mean,
it was a head scratcher of a hire, but they backed him, and now it's they're pulling the plug. Which part of it, I guess, you can kind of respect. Saying, hey, all right, we got it wrong. We're going to start fresh. But the biggest question mark in Houston is, what is the direction of the club? How do they want to play? Who are going to be the players for the future? Because other than HH and Ferreira and Alberto Carrasquilla, there's decisions to be made about where they want to go. I do think there was a need that wasn't addressed on the roster side of things that still needs to be addressed. You need a bona fide playmaker in Major League Soccer to succeed. They haven't gotten one.
I think they need a full roster rebuild, and if that starts with a new coach saying these are the kind of players that I want, maybe that's the direction you go in. Victor, you mentioned the timing. That's exactly what Carlos, who's watching on YouTube, noted. He said, I think the timing of the firing is what's odd about this. Why this late in the season with just a few games left? This wasn't a season where there were 2 playoff contenders anyways. Carlos would have preferred they roll with Paulo Nagamura, give him a second year, and he cites the Josh Wolf situation where a lot of pressure was on Josh last year. Obviously, we've seen what Austin FC has done this year. I think the difference there,
and that was one of the things brought up, right? I mean, that the thing they clung on to was, hey, look at Austin FC. Josh Wolf is in the second year. That's working out.
And that's why, again, it doesn't feel like a Pat Onstad decision. It actually feels like a bit of pressure on Pat Onstad to go get the right guy, because
I think so.
That's the assertion, is that this is not the right guy and that we need to hit the reset button. And if you don't get the reset right, there's another reset coming after that one. I think the pressure is all on Pat Onstad to find the right guy.
I totally agree. I think that if you were in a certain quote unquote ballpark for managers in the first search, okay, there were 100 guys who threw their name in the hat. There's going to be hundreds of guys anyway. Everyone wants an MLS job. Why would you not, right? It's a very attractive league for both domestic and foreign managers. You're going to have no shortage of people who want this job. But if you were playing in the sort of area of, some USL Championship guys, maybe a couple guys with MLS experience, maybe a few guys from Liga MX, if you open that up to, what if we brought in someone from South America? What if we brought in someone with European experience, but those were not in the budget previously? And now Ted Siegel is saying, let's expand this a little more, than I think you can understand where this is coming from. Real quick, 2 quick thoughts before we go into FC Dallas and Austin FC. I think the difference to me between this and the Josh Wolf situation is with Austin FC, you saw the trajectory not only with what Wolf was doing in the tactics and the schemes, but with the roster being built. Driussi coming in, the team obviously getting better, us all realizing, even as people who are not, soccer technical directors necessarily, like everyone could see.
Oh, there were signs. There were signs of what they were building.
Right? This guy's something special. I don't know if you're seeing that for Houston right now. I don't know.
And you saw improvement as soon as Driussi got plugged in as well, which also showed that same sign. And when Houston's gotten better players, it hasn't necessarily turned into. I mean, it certainly hasn't turned into results with Herrera. So that's also.
And they've regressed. They haven't. They got worse. And I think the big one, maybe that again, maybe didn't get hit on locally at the time as much, but maybe did internally. That 6-0 loss against Philadelphia. That was an embarrassing defeat. I mean, that was something that. And again, you didn't see progress during the course of the game. If anything, the team has gone backwards. I think. Yeah, we assume the pocket change. The pocketbook will open up, but this could go very many different directions. I mean, could they go for nostalgia, right? And maybe a more sure thing with Dominic Kinnear, right? Are they going to bet again on an unproven coach, somebody from the USL? Are they finally gonna maybe get over their, for lack of a better word, fear and go into Liga MX? But some of the guys that were there, Victor Manuel Vucetich, Jimmy Lozano, who was in the final stages of the coaching search, they're not available anymore. Maybe a Turco Mohamed, I don't know if Tuca Ferretti, if they're ready for that.
He's out there. Man, that would be. I mean, Vucetich as well. Those would be experiences. That would be something that we haven't seen before.
And speaking of Josh Wolf, I mean, I did hear David Goss on that Spaces that you were on this morning, Victor, talk about Nolan Sheldon, but also Davey Arnaud is there, and I think both of those guys, are certainly going to be looking for head coaching opportunities. I just don't know if that's too much of a retread, and also, I think this is. To me, this feels like Houston's got to go get a big fish or bust, but maybe not. Maybe it does end up being something like that.
Although to be fair, Luchi Gonzalez was let go at around the same stage of last season, and things worked out well for everyone involved. So maybe this is the same situation where a guy like Nico Estevez gets brought in and has great success. We just don't really know his name yet, or soccer heads know his name, but he's not a mainstream name yet. I definitely think that could be the situation. We'll have more coverage of the Dynamo's future over on the Striker. Let's talk about FC Dallas. Talking about the difficulties that the Dynamo are having, FCD with an absolutely fantastic result. They jump into third place in the Western Conference with a 3-0 victory against Minnesota United on the road. Against the Loons, it was kind of a cagey kind of game. It seemed like there were chances from both sides, and then all of a sudden FC Dallas scored one, and next thing you knew, they were up 3-0. Own goal from Michael Boxall that Jesus Ferreira kind of forced him to on a cross from Paul Arriola. Alan Velasco with a beauty a couple minutes later, and then Jesus Ferreira gets one of his own, 2 of those assists from Sebastian Lletget, who I profiled on the Striker. Did I presage this? Did I know this was going to happen? Yeah, I did. No, I think Sebastian Lletget has been fantastic so far this year since he arrived in that trade. And you talk about teams getting better with big moves. Chris, this was the kind of move where we said, we didn't know FC Dallas needed this kind of player, but he should help out. It's been a month. It's been a quick kind of, I called it like a breakneck adaptation for Lletget, because even though he's a veteran player with MLS experience, he's still got to figure out how to play with these guys. He's been there for a month. He's basically had games almost every 3 days. And this week kind of had a bit of time to breathe, to rest, to relax, to actually train well and not have to think about recovery and everything. And it really paid off. He was pulling the strings and gave FC Dallas a dimension they just haven't really had so far this season. All of a sudden, you go from last week where we were like, will they slip out of the playoffs? Will they slip out of the home game situation? Now they control their own destiny for the home playoff game.
Right.
Everyone's feeling good.
And it comes with the perfect time, because as all these other teams at the top, LAFC and Austin FC in particular are, sort of sputtering a little bit, starting to finally show some vulnerability. And the fact that they both brought in players that they expect to be big pieces that just, they're struggling to work them in. And FC Dallas has, taken Sebastian Lletget, plugged him right in, and they look like an even better team than they were before. And I continue to pound the drum. I think FC Dallas is as much a contender as we get to, to playoffs, to win the Western Conference as anybody. I really, have been impressed by this team throughout the season, and to go on the road right after Austin FC was up there and, lost 2-1 in a pretty ugly, just game that Minnesota United controlled, to go in there and just, come out with a 3-0 victory is super impressive to me, and continues to speak to Nico Estevez and the build that yes. FC Dallas is making.
I think Estevez got his game plan totally right, and they were able to execute it. Reynoso took a knock, but frustrated for most of the game. There were some half chances there, but after we'll get to Austin FC having this happen to them as well, but after Hani Mukhtar just smoked FC Dallas in Nashville the last time they went on the road, I think you look at a talented 10 who can score or assist. Could this guy also smoke us? And FC Dallas made sure that didn't happen. The one sort of, you're saying, hey, FCD is as much of a contender as anyone. I agree with you, actually. I think they look really good. The attack is getting hot at the right time, as I'm going to write about this week on the Striker. I think that with LAFC coming to town this weekend, I know they struggled in Austin. I know they struggled in Houston. Even though it's another trip to Texas where they could struggle, I think without Matt Hedges, who's out with a knee knock for around 10 days from last week, so I don't think he's going to start this week. Stopping great attacks and they shut down Reynoso. Stopping great attacks may be difficult with Nkosi Tafari, Jose Martinez center back pairing, but they did a great job against Minnesota. You saw how critical Marco Farfan has been this season. He had another great game, as we've kind of come to expect from him. And even Tomasi had a really rough first half of the season. All of a sudden, he's come on and been quite good in the second half. And you look at that FCD back line with Martin Paz behind them, and these guys are, there's games where they fall apart, right? And when they fall apart, man, they can break like they did against Nashville. But Victor, you're looking at this back line, you're looking at LAFC coming into town. You're saying, maybe they can stop Carlos Vela, maybe they can stop Gareth Bale, but maybe not. Matt Hedges has been so critical, but they got it done on Saturday. So I'm in wait and see mode on the.
But I think what you mentioned too is, the biggest question mark of consistency has been in the attack. Can they keep rolling? 100%. I think it makes 100%. It for FCD way easier to defend when they got a couple goals.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. What team doesn't have defensive issues? And that's maybe a good segue to Austin FC. But like when you look at the top teams in this league, LAFC's been vulnerable. Austin FC's certainly been vulnerable. FC Dallas is vulnerable too, but now they have the pieces to go punish teams. And if you can punish teams, that's the name of the game in MLS. And I think that's continues to be the theme. Like everybody wants to make changes at center back. Everybody wants to add a piece to their back line. In a salary cap league, you can only do so much. And, maybe FC Dallas is a little weaker than those other teams, but if they can punish teams, then they're going to have everything that they need, I think.
It's strange. I think that's the key. After that Nashville blowout, I asked manager Nico Estevez, hey, what were the issues here defensively? And he was like, we didn't attack. He's like, there's no stretching them. There was no sort of like, we didn't provide anything going forward. So they were just able to kind of just boop, 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 boop. He obviously didn't use the sound effects, but that's what he was saying. He was like, they didn't boop, boop, boop. So yeah, basically,
I'll see that quoted in a print story that would come across really well.
If FCD cannot provide that danger going forward, which they weren't able to in that game, with Franco Jara leading the line, with some of the other players who typically are standing out for FCD, not standing out, pinned back by the fullbacks from Nashville FC getting forward, that is where you can see some of the issues happen. Those issues did not happen against Minnesota United. Ariola setting up a goal, Velasco and Ferreira scoring a goal. If that trio with Leggett behind them, with Pomical behind them, if those guys are all working, this really is a team that you could say maybe they have a run in them, but they certainly should be hosting an MLS Cup playoff game and be in the postseason. They got LAFC this weekend. It's a big one. You talked about that Bad Bunny concert, Victor. Bad Bunny Friday, FC Dallas, LAFC Saturday. It's going to be a good weekend in the John Arnold household. Let's talk about Austin FC. It's not a good weekend for Austin. Late one, rain, not what you wanted to happen, Chris. Not how you wanted it to go.
We've avoided weather delays for the most part. We've avoided weather delays for the most part this season, and certainly at Q2 Stadium. And this was not that week. Weather delay Wednesday, weather delay Saturday. It was not ideal, and the play on the pitch was not ideal either. And Josh Wolf said it after the match. There's a recipe developing here to beat Austin FC, and they've got to find a way to combat it, because if you can come in and make things ugly, sit deep and counter and win some set pieces against Austin FC, the book is out. You can punish them and make it even more difficult once you're up 1-0.
So what do they do? You say, hey, there's a formula showing up. I think Nashville's a team that's sort of uniquely able to kind of take advantage, to use that formula. Gary Smith, man, that guy is who he is, right? Like, and that's that. When you talk about that formula, I think his eyes probably light up. You're like, wait, I could defend and use set pieces and just let Hani Mukhtar do it. Cool, I'm in, right? If a team isn't Nashville SC, are they still able to deploy that blueprint, or how does Austin counter that as we look toward what we think will be it's going to be their first playoff game? How do they make sure? I think Phil wrote, hey, is this going to be sort of a bad omen toward what we see in the playoffs, because there is this recipe formulating? What do they have to do to get out of it?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the interesting thing, is if they can tighten up a little bit on certainly the set piece aspect. I think is something that you can train and work on, and not give Walker. I was watching the the set pieces with Walker Zimmerman and Bill Tuoloma. And sure, those are two of the best guys in the league at getting on the end of set balls, but you're on the wrong side of the dude. Like, how are you just going to let him, Walker Zimmerman in particular, Julio Cascante barely even laid a hand on him on that set play. So those are things that I think you can fix. And then the other part is sort of what you were alluding to with Nico Estevez, that I think that Joshua believes in too, is that go punish teams, be brave on the ball, take chances, don't just, pass the ball around against a low block. And I think Austin did so well earlier in the year. Those big wins early against, Miami and Cincinnati, which I know that's going way back, but that was, proof that to Austin FC that they could attack a low block. And I think that has been, something that they kind of were able to go back to throughout the year and all these comebacks. And now it's kind of showing up in a different direction where, they're getting countered a little bit. And, I think it's continuing to stick to their guns, and I think getting Rigoni settled and worked into this team, I think will make a big difference. Having somebody that's dynamic, he's not quite there yet. I don't know if that's just game fitness, or I think it's more of an understanding issue where, he's sometimes floating inside a little bit. Guys don't know exactly how they're going to play off of him necessarily as well. And so I think that once he gets settled, I think you might see a different dynamic, something that's a little less predictable from Austin FC. But for now, I think it's, a matter of continuing to you can't let teams take away Sebastian Driussi the way that Nashville did.
And I was gonna go into that a little bit. Is just how much is this an over dependency a little bit on Driussi, where if he doesn't, if he has a quiet game, pretty much the whole team goes quiet, and it can't be that way, right? Because right. Maybe there's a reason why there weren't more All-Stars from the Austin FC roster, because
I think that's a great point. I think that's a
great
point. You look at like over dependencies. The big rig signing is big, right?
From that LAFC though. Like, it's not like Austin FC is not capable of having a complete team performance. No. And they also had Maxi Urruti out in both of these matches as well.
Yeah, I think like when you talk about over dependency, it's something where, Chris, you were just mentioning, hey, like every MLS team in this kind of league where you have to do, spend allocation money and stick to a cap. Every team has these pieces where you're like, yeah, we wish that could be better. All the contenders, right? Talk about over dependence. Yes, I think Austin is over dependent on Driussi, but they have Big Rig now, and they have Maxi Urruti, and they have Diego Fagundes. They have these other guys who can sort of slot in. Nashville, you talk about a team, they're extremely over dependent on Hani Mukhtar. Minnesota's over dependent on Reynoso. I think you look at some of these contenders, and there is an over dependency a lot of times, but easier said than done a lot of times to mark those guys out of the game. Yes, FC Dallas was able to get, Bebelo out of this game. Yes, Nashville was able to largely get Driussi out of this game. But in the playoffs, at home, where it matters, are you really going to be able to stop these guys? I think the answer is almost certainly going to be no with Driussi. And as long as they can avoid a matchup like this in the playoffs, you like their chances.
The thing is,
they're not going to be able to avoid a match.
You can't avoid every team that's going to sit low and counter against you.
No, because now, the formula is there, right? Look, like when the last time FC Dallas played Austin, they played in a sort of not drastically different, but they deployed those tactics, right? And you saw it almost work for 3 points, right? And, I think Nico Estevez is the guy who intimately knows what Josh Wolf wants to do. And so maybe he was a little ahead of the curve on this might be able to give him some problems. And you're going to see teams try and do that, even if it's not their normal style of play, because it has worked against them. I think the challenge for Austin is figuring out.
And Austin's going, I know we need to wrap up, but Austin's going through the stages of the MLS season. And I think for a lot of these guys, it's the first time that they're in playoff mode. And some of these other teams have already entered playoff mode. And all these open, fun matches of the summer, that's over now. These teams are trying to fight and scrap their way to the playoffs. And Austin needs to match that intensity the way that they did, against LAFC, where they were the aggressors. And I think too often they've got caught in these physical matches and haven't quite been up to it. And I think they certainly have that in them, but I think it's taking, and Brad Stuver put this really well. You can go read, Phil's column and then, my notebook as well, him talking about like, there's some guys on this team that need to understand what the playoffs are going to be. And this is what it's going to look like. These were playoff esque matches, and Austin didn't answer the bell. The good news is they weren't actual playoff matches, and there's plenty of time for them to learn to answer the bell.
Austin goes to the Seattle Sounders, 7 p.m. Central on Saturday. FCD hosts LAFC at 7:30 in Toyota Stadium, and the Dynamo welcoming Sporting Kansas City. We're going to have coverage of all those games, of course, on the Striker Texas, the Striker now national, thestriker.com for all your MLS coverage needs. 30-day free trial if you're not already linked up. You can check out the playoff run coverage. I think you'll stick around for the postseason. Even if you're a Dynamo fan, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to like. Victor's thoughts on the next coach, the actual next coach announcement, all sorts of stuff for you that we'll get into. It's all on the Striker. We hope you check it out. Best thing we ate this week, real quick. I was in Mexico City. I ate some quesadillas actually that were like unbelievable. Nice. I'll give you the rec if you tweet me. Anybody else? How
are you going to come up with best thing I ate and not give the recommendation?
Okay, Molina Puyol, like extreme. It's fancy.
Right.
You could get it to go. You could just get it to go then just be eating a quesadilla. Whatever. What do you mean? How am I not going to give the recommendation? My mom's pozole guy.
I'm just saying. What are you going to put it behind the paywall?
I mean, look. If people want the Striker, if people want best thing I ate this week to go behind the paywall, we'll do it. Only Striker subscribers. I had some
empanadas at Geodis Park that were pretty good. I'm blanking on the actual name of the place, but you can find them. Empanadas on
Empanadas Mukhtar.
Yeah, Empanadas Mukhtar. I don't think that quite works with like his Senegalese German heritage, but I'm sure he enjoys some empanadas on occasion as well. So it could work.
Yeah.
All right, I got a little coffee shop, Carolina Coffee. Good spot.
Carolina, like the name, or Catalina, like the wine mixer?
Catalina, like the second. There you go.
Like the wine mixer. All right. Well, we'll be back next week on Monday. No holiday to disrupt our flow. We'll talk about everything that goes on the MLS weekend next week. We'll talk to you guys then. Take care.